Hello, scholars. So welcome to week 3. This week we're going to be building even further upon the foundation that you've already established with weeks 1 and 2. So let's start with just a quick recap. Okay, week 1 was having us consider what are genres, right? What is our definition of genre? Who are we as writers? And what is the thought process that goes into writing for an academic community? So we had Stuart Green, we had Catherine Savini, we had Carrie Dirk, and all of those were helping you to transition the way that you think about approaching writing studies, about the way you approach academic writing, about the way you consider genres to exist and occur, and the functions and the purposes. And so we're laying kind of an understanding of how writing works, in academic communities, and what we do as writing scholars, specifically then with an eye on genres, okay? So that was week 1. Last week, for week 2, we got a little bit more into what genres are. You would have conducted your genre analysis worksheet, which you were to pick three artifacts and do an analysis of those and focus on what can those observations mean in a larger context. And you took those observations and turned them into the genre analysis and research proposal, where you were pairing the idea of this is something that is interesting and valuable as a writing studies scholar to consider, and this is how I might go about doing that research. So I believe I used the analogy before. If you were writing a grant proposal, first you would have to establish that what you're looking at is legitimate, right? So you had your observations, you tied those in with the connections from our class readings to give it a solid, like, if they say that genre is this, I'm seeing this, and this is how that meets that definition. So you establish that it's in fact a valuable and legitimate form of our topic of inquiry. And if I were to give you that money, I'd have to know how you're going to use it. So first you would establish what it is, and then you explain to me the research you're going to conduct so I can write the check out to you and you can go about doing your research. So that was the purpose of the genre analysis and research proposal, was to give you an idea of if this academic article that you'll be writing, which is due in week 6, were in fact the fruits of your labor. Typically academics need to be paid in order to do their thing. If they're not lucky enough to exist on their teaching salaries, then typically they need more funding to get into doing that research. And so that's where having these kinds of ideas and outlining like what it is you'll be doing come into play. So that was week 2, right? You were thinking about critical thinking with Spender. You were considering from inquiry to academic writing. You were looking at how you approach writing in terms of it being a conversation, how you go about reading to be a more effective reader, because the better you are as a reader, the more effective you are as a writer, and some of those strategies in terms of drafting and planning for lines of inquiry and such. So what are we going to do with that? What was the purpose of that, right? I'm not giving these assignments to be arbitrary by any means, but instead they are all building into the actual academic article. So the academic article is where you would compile all of the research you have done, both primary and secondary. It would almost be like your progress report at the end of all of your research to prove that you in fact did this thing, you looked at it, and like here's the finished product of what the investment was of this grant if you were to receive funding for your research. So if we understand that Stuart Green says that argument is conversation, we know then that there are other voices in the academic community that are probably doing research, if not exactly on our topic, or at least related to. So if you're someone who looked at maybe, or is choosing to look at YouTube or Reddit or Instagram or any social media platform, I guarantee you there are writing studies scholars and other scholars right now that are investigating and looking at and examining different types of social media. It is an abundance of like free data that we all have access to, and we're all so invested in that there are a lot of scholars working on it. I mean, you think about how personally invested you are in your social media activity, if you're someone who does engage in those things. And, there's a lot of time and energy that goes into both producing your own content and examining other people's content. And it's a phenomenon that is relatively new. So it's kind of exciting because, in the academic community, you're kind of at the forefront of people that are engaging in research on this particular topic, because social media has evolved and expanded so rapidly that researchers are still catching up. So you will find other research related to your topic. Chances are it won't be exactly on your topic, but you'll find it at least in the same neighborhood as your topic. And so there's like no shortage of sources typically on anything that you want to investigate. But also, it's exciting to be part of the conversation. And to be a good conversationalist, as we discussed last week, you have to be processing and synthesizing what is happening from the other voices, right? In order to best frame the thing that you want to say to be effective. If you're not considering how other people are talking about the subject and you just chime in with your own opinions, it typically doesn't go as well as if you had been listening and processing and thinking about what it is other people are saying on your topic, so that you can respond to not only what they're saying, but in shaping your responses in vein of what the existing conversation is. Now, we're going to start looking at the CARS model this week. And that's important because it's a large part of the blueprint of your academic articles. You're going to find out later, if you want to look ahead, you can, but the academic article is the combination of the CARS model introduction and MRAD. So MRAD is methods, results, and discussion, and CARS is creating a research space. So if you think about the exigence, the purpose for crafting your academic article, first you have to situate the reader with what it is you're going to be talking about in terms of the research that the primary research that you're going to conduct. So in order you can't just jump in and be like, oh, I looked at these 3 Instagram pages over the course of a year to see social influences on the construction of people's messages. But let me first tell you about what other people are saying about Instagram, or let me explain what Instagram is first. Like, there's an order by which you need to present your information and your data that makes the most sense and is the most effective in terms of crafting your argument. Now, next week, your CARS model introduction and annotated bibliography will be due at the end of week 4. So this week, we're going to start gathering the things and learning the skills to gather the things that we're going to need to craft that particular thing. The good news is, by the end of next week, once you have completed your CARS model introduction and annotated bibliography, the CARS model introduction is 3 to 4 pages, and that means that you'll have 3 to 4 pages already done of the academic article that will be due later. So there's like a chunk that will already be done through that assignment once that's completed next week. But in order to find the sources you will need for your annotated bibliography and your CARS model introduction, first you have to know how to conduct research effectively, how to use the library database effectively, and like how the CARS model will function, so that you understand where you'll be putting all this together. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the readings. If you have available your From Inquiry to Academic Writing, I'm going to jump right in. We were assigned chapter 3 and 4 this week, right? Writing summaries and paraphrases is chapter 3 on page 64. Now, if you take a look at the assignment prompt for the annotated bibliography and CARS model introduction, the annotated bibliography component is where you find the sources of your conversation and you do an analysis of that particular source. You turn that analysis into what would be a summary of that source. And now the summary part is tricky, and there is a bit of an art to it. So I'm providing this opportunity for you to have a chance to practice this before you get into some of your other classes where you'll probably have to write annotated bibliographies moving forward. So this will be possibly your first time doing it. I'm not sure if you've had the chance before. But an annotated bibliography is like a works cited or a reference list. You have all of your entries listed in the proper formatting, author, last name, title, publication, etc. And underneath that particular entry, you would have a paragraph. Some professors require 2 to 3 paragraphs. I'm going to emphasize more the art of being to the point. So I only want 4 to 6 sentences that are going to summarize your particular source. And that is going to be focusing on what is the author saying, what are the main claims, and how is it relevant to your conversation. So those are 3 things you'll be focusing on, and you have 4 to 6 sentences to craft that. It's trickier than it sounds. You want to present the gist of the argument, right? I'm jumping ahead into, let's see, what page is that? Page 74 talks about the gist. The gist is more than just the thesis of what an author is writing. The gist is encapsulating that and processing that a little bit more in terms of the paper overall. Okay, so make sure you're paying attention to that, because that's going to be more the focus of what you're looking at. It is your formulation, and I'm quoting this on 74, your formulation of the author's main idea composed for the needs of your own argument. So there's going to be parts of your sources that you're going to leave out entirely and focus more on what it is that's important to you that this particular author is saying. And that's important to consider when you think about finding sources that are kind of doing research on your topic, but maybe don't have much of it that's related to the thing that you're studying. But perhaps they give you a really good working understanding of like what Instagram is or what YouTube is, or some concrete things that you can say about video game videos or whatever it may be that you're looking at. And then the rest of it like has nothing to do with what you're talking about. So you want to focus on the parts that are relevant to you, and that's where it comes into getting to the gist of what's important about this particular secondary source for your purposes, okay? But let's go back to the start of chapter 3. So if you're thinking about, we're going to have to be summarizing, right? Summarizing or paraphrasing what it is this particular source is doing. There's an element of synthesis there that's important, and it demonstrates higher level learning, where you are taking everything in and then you're crafting it to suit your purposes and then creating something that will demonstrate what it is that you need. So it is more than just simply telling us like what it is that that particular author is saying, but there is that idea that you have to include the purpose, your purpose in that as well. So paraphrasing, look at the particular chapter, when to paraphrase, when to summarize, and when to quote. Those are important things for you to understand and take to heart when it comes time to both write your Cars Model introduction, write your academic article, and pretty much all the writing you'll do for school going forward outside of this class. Page 69, steps to writing a paraphrase are very helpful. That little box, they're always helpful to pull those out. Page 70, just before the article starts, there's a couple of numbered points that are suggested methods for summarizing. It's describing the key claims, selecting examples to illustrate the argument, presenting the gist of the argument, and contextualizing what you summarize. Highlight that. That's basically what you'll be doing for your annotated bibliography. Page 73, we're going to talk about key claims of the text. And this is important because this builds upon this idea of being a more effective reader to be a better writer. So the more, as you're analyzing these sources, if you do these steps, notice how paragraphs begin and end. Notice the author's point of view and transition. I'm on page 72 and 73 right now. Those are things that will help you be more effective when you're writing paragraphs for your academic article or any other particular type of writing you need to do. If you're noticing how the paragraphs begin and end and they're trying to make a particular point, that's a strategy then you can implement as you move on as a writer. Same thing with the use of transitions. On page 73, it says, in the middle of the page there, it says, once you identify an author's point of view, you'll start to notice contrasts and oppositions in the argument, instances where the words are less positive or neutral or negative, and those are signaled by how the author uses transitions. So if you're trying to figure out what this particular author is saying or what their point of view is on this particular topic, look for the use of transitions, and then that is something that you can mimic when you are constructing your arguments down the road. So something else I want to point out to you is that when you are reading or finding your secondary sources for your annotated bibliography and Carr's Model Introduction, you're not reading for entire comprehension. And I know that sounds revolutionary in an academic class, that you're not reading for comprehension or entire comprehension. You're reading, when you're finding your sources, you're scanning. You're scanning to see, is this particular thing useful to me? It would take you a year and a day if you were to read every single thing to the point of entire comprehension. That's not the point of this. You're not giving a book report on this other article. You don't need to know it inside and out. You're only trying to get a working understanding of what the conversation is about a particular topic and what any given 5 voices in a conversation have to say on a particular topic. You don't need to be, if you were having a real life conversation, you wouldn't have to know all the inner workings of someone's research in order to have a conversation with them. You kind of, as you're listening to them, you're taking their key points, you're noticing what their argument is, right? The use of transitions, all those things, so that you can just best respond to those things. So please don't take time as you're finding these sources to become intimately acquainted with all of the points, the research, and everything else that they have to say. Instead, think of it in terms of, I need to understand enough so that I can speak back to what it is that you're talking about. Okay, so I already talked about the gist on page 74. Contextualizing, that's important so that you can be more effective in the way that you write your summaries for your annotated bibliography. Page 77, of course, those fabulous little boxes with the steps to writing a summary. That's all good stuff. And then on page 79, steps to writing yourself into an academic conversation. That's very helpful to consider. We're going to get more into that with the Carr's model, but the more data you have behind you or in your running code as you're reading and writing to think about how you're going to do this next thing, the more helpful it will be, right? Then we move into chapter 4, talking about the difference between claims and evidence. This is more important when it comes to scrutinizing your sources, this particular chapter. This is going to give you the foundation and understanding that you will need to find effective sources to establish your conversation, right? Think about the identity claims of value, of policy, of fact, and that will help you in terms of finding out if it's a useful source. Basically, this is all to help you find useful sources. So think about those things as you're reading chapter 4. These are all approaches to helping you be more effective in finding your sources. And then I think it was on page 108, I had you read basically analyzing and comparing arguments. That little bit right there was just something to consider, because yes, your annotations are going to describe what each source is saying. When it comes to putting that into the Carr's Model Introduction, and I know this is something we're going to work on more next week, but I want you already thinking about this. A conversation is not one person making all of their points on a topic, and then the next person speaking and making all of their points on a topic, and then a third person speaking and making all of their points on a topic. No, a conversation is one person saying something and then maybe someone else chiming in and saying, oh, well, I agree with that, and this is why, and this is what I have to say about that, and then maybe another person also adds into that. And then that segues into like a next thing that you start talking about. And maybe one of the people that have already spoken has something else to say about that, and maybe the fourth person that never had spoken yet has something to add to that conversation. And it's a sharing of ideas that are similar and talking about that versus 4 or 5 monologues back to back that then maybe an outside person listening has to make sense of where the connections are. That's not what we're doing. Instead, what we're doing is you're going to be arranging those shared topics as you construct your Carr's Model Introduction. That's the way that you're synthesizing your particular text. So it's like what ideas am I seeing across my sources that are similar, and then how can I group them by those particular ideas? And I do have you reading a sample article next week that was written by another student. Actually, no, it's this week. It's the Cars Model Practice. Priscilla Samoya wrote an article about TED Talks that was published in UCF's journal called Stylus, which publishes first-year writing students products from like what we're doing. And so this particular article does an excellent job of arranging her sources by shared talking point, as opposed to just having a list of ongoing points. So think about those things when we're doing that. And then as we move into easy